now to prevent further delays. I
Okay.
have given them 10 minutes. Aubrey is not inside at this moment. Maybe he's
All right.
just coming on the staircase. Who knows?
Well,
So I
that's
will now
okay. I
introduce.
mean, he heard me at Harvard, so that's fine.
Mhm.
So, any rate, you want me to begin my talk?
Yes, but I will first introduce you now to the public. Okay?
All right. All right.
Hello, welcome for the afternoon session. Now we have Paul McGlothin with us. Paul McGlothin is the Vice President of Research for the Calorie Restriction Society. He's practicing calorie restriction himself. He has written a book about it, The CR Way, which is an excellent book on calorie restriction in humans. So without further delay, I would like to welcome Paul and get him started. Paul, you can start.
All right. Thank you, Sven. It's quite an honor to be here with you and to speak with you about calorie restriction for a better, longer life. I appreciate the folks at ImmInst inviting me here. Many here at ImmInst share the same vision that Meredith and I do. That's why we like to support this organization, because we want to try for an indefinite lifespan, and we're very optimistic about that. But the question is, how might we get to that point? Here we are in 2010, and we need a bridge. And not just a bridge that gets us from 2010 to 2040 or 2050, whatever, but something that makes our life better, that makes it worthwhile to spend that time getting older and wiser and better. And I suggest to you that this bridge here in the center of my presentation, where you see the feet going across it, represents calorie restriction. And Meredith and I like to think that our feet are walking across that bridge. And I hope that after you hear this presentation today, that if your feet aren't already going across that bridge with us, that perhaps you will join us. But I think the first thing to ask is, what is calorie restriction? We really need to know the answer to that question to be able to know whether we would like to do it or not. And I'll bet if I went around to each person in the audience and asked them that question, each person might have a bit of a different idea about what it really is. So for the first part of this presentation, I'd like to see if we can answer that question together. And first, let's turn to a great intellectual magazine here that was printed in New York. Here's their idea of calorie restriction. Life, if you can call it that, on the fewest calories your body can stand. Is that your idea of calorie restriction? Some people in the media apparently have that idea. I suggest to you that the truth about calorie restriction is really very different. So, one of the ways in which you begin to need to think about calorie restriction depends upon your goals. And that depends upon whether you are a fly, a worm, yeast, maybe a monkey, or a human. If you're one of the lab animals that I mentioned, your goals are set by the researcher. That researcher may want to measure the length of your life. That researcher may also want to measure the effects of calorie restriction on a specific goal, such as how it might prevent diabetes, heart disease, things like that. But if you're a human, you have choices. It depends on the person. And with thousands of people coming into the CR way and the CR society and telling us what their goals are. A lot of people will come there just for healthful weight loss. Some may come and start calorie restriction because they want to prevent a disease. They know they have that specific disease in their heritage, or they may be suffering from heart disease, high blood pressure, things like that. But most people start calorie restriction for optimal living right now, to realize their full potential with the hope for a longer, healthier life. But the now is most important. Well, okay, what should your calorie intake be? Again, if you're a lab animal, your calories are going to be limited by the researcher. Your goal might be a 20% limitation, a 30% limitation. I've actually seen experiments that limit calories up to 60%. That is determined by the scientist. And we often have scientists speaking before the media saying you need to limit calories by 30% to be calorie restricted. I respectfully disagree with that definition, and for people in the media and around the world who are listening to this, I would suggest there's a very different idea of what calorie restriction is. First, if you're a human, the amount of calories that you need to limit are up to you. There's flexibility. You might choose to limit calories by only 5%, and if you want, you might choose to limit calories by 20 to 30%. That depends upon your temperament. But let's take an example that was provided by our great friend Brad Wilcox in 2007, and he looked at elderly Okinawans who were born in the year, or I should say, who started calorie restriction the year I was born in 1948, and he found that over 60 years they limited calories by 11%. Not hard to do. As it turns out, just that 11% restriction allowed their life expectancy to be the highest in Japan. At age 65, females were likely to live to almost 90, and males likely to live to 83.5. As far as I know, that documentation confirms that they are the longest lived society in the world. But remember, these are people who grew up with calorie restriction as a part of their culture. But what about the new calorie restriction? What about intentional CR? Well, I've got some very, very interesting gentlemen to introduce you to on this next slide that might provide kind of a suggestion about what would happen if you do intentional CR. We call these the CR Way All-Stars. All of them have similar regimens. They have a 20 to 30% calorie reduction, and they have limited fasting. I'll talk with you more about that as the presentation goes on. Up here in the upper left is our great friend Ralph Cornell, who lived to be 104. He practiced CR for 50 years. He started it in his mid-50s, and he lived, as I say, to 104. Here, the next person in the center is truly a CRWay All-Star. His name is Fernando Lapalo. He has been practicing CR since the age of 5 years old for 104 years. We just talked with him on the telephone a few months ago. He's up, he's active, he's married, he makes speeches. He's 109 right now, just celebrated his 109th birthday. And then here we have on the lower right a man who's been in the news, a very famous man, the oldest man in the world right now, Walter Bruning, who's 114 years old. He's been practicing CR for 36 years, and his regimen is exactly the same as Meredith's and mine. He eats a very large breakfast, he eats a smaller lunch, and then that's it. Now, please, when I say something like that, don't think that if you want to start CR today, you need to include daily limited fasting in your regimen. That's not at all the case. But I'm just simply saying that that is what these people have chosen to do. And right down here at the bottom of the slide, you see a quote. Notice that I didn't say Ralph said this, Fernando said this, or Walter said this. They all said it. Even though they came from different cultures and live in different places, you can find them in what they've written saying, I think you should push back from the table when you're still hungry. That was their way of approaching CR, and it looks like it has served them pretty well. All right, let's see what else we have to consider. Well, what about your food intake? Well, if you're a lab animal, your food intake is going to be very controlled. You're going to get some delicious rat chow, maybe some monkey chow. And I must tell you that I've looked at the composition of what is often fed to lab animals, and I might say that it's usually so awful that they probably require 30% restriction to get benefits. But that's not the case with humans. That might be the reason why 5% or 11% CR works, because humans have the freedom to choose. We can choose nutrient-dense and delicious foods that delight us, and we can create recipes that are fun to enjoy. And we can also select foods that help us achieve optimal health and happiness. Blueberries, for example, are an all-star that's a part of our diet. That has been shown independently, possibly to extend life and possibly to enhance memory. So you can do a lot if you're a human to choose foods that really make your calorie restriction life perhaps better and more effective. Well, what about emotions? That's a hard one. If you're a lab animal, it depends upon your cage conditions. Hey, if you are a mouse and you have to share your cage with 20 other mice and it's kind of cramped, I would say you probably have an emotional pretty hard time. But if you have, and your emotions may also depend upon your feeding schedule, when you are fed during the day, I imagine if you're calorie restricted, a lab animal might be very happy. Also, it may depend upon, oops, someone just switched off my slide and switched my slide to a different place. I'd like to go back to where we were. Okay.
Sorry about that, Paul. While we have a break,
Okay.
if you could stay away from your own mic just a few centimeters further,
Okay.
that would improve the sound quality. We can hear you very well, so you don't need to speak close to the mic.
All right. Good. Thank you. Thank you for your guidance, and feel free to continue to guide me. Your emotions, if you're a lab animal, may also depend upon your contact with humans, and if your humans take time to pet you or whatever. But if you're a human, there's a wide variation. You can be under a lot of stress, and that might affect your CR very negatively. But you also have the freedom to add practices that can enhance your emotional well-being and possibly your CR benefits, such as meditation, yoga, moderate exercise, and other holistic practices that are really a very important part of the CR way. Well, okay, so I'm introducing CR. What are the benefits of calorie restriction? Well, we now know from human studies that Meredith and I actually helped get started at Washington University, that we've done with Dr. John Hollisey and Dr. Luigi Fontana. We know that there is less cardiovascular aging. We've seen that the hearts of calorie restrictors who have been doing CR for a long time perform like those of folks who are around 15 to 20 years younger. We have lower body fat. My body fat is around 12, around the same as that of an Olympic athlete. Fat is burned rather than stored on people who are doing serious CR. Reduced blood pressure. My record for in the laboratory was blood pressure of 88 over 53. That was measured around 10 years ago. My blood pressure has remained the same. Meredith is very similar. Many other serious CR folks have that same kind of blood pressure reading. Total cholesterol. Our total cholesterol is actually burned. We'll find out in a slide coming up that cholesterol formation is blocked. And cholesterol happens to be very low on us, as does LDL. My LDL was around 55. My triglycerides, which is the average of many CR folks, ranges around 55 to 65. All are significantly decreased. We have less arterial plaque formation. I'm not just winging it and taking my information from a mouse study. I've actually looked at my arterial plaque formation with Dr. Fontana on a computer screen, and we found that over the 6 years that the study has gone on with Washington University, I've had no arterial plaque accumulation whatsoever. Lower glucose levels. The average glucose level was around 84 of those serious calorie restrictors at Washington University. More energy. I can attest to that, and I will show you in a minute why that is so. That's one of the things that is universally talked about. You feel exhilarated when you practice calorie restriction. Less inflammation. A good indication of inflammation is high sensitive C-reactive protein, which is often measured when a doctor wants to predict if you're going to have a heart attack. Well, C-reactive protein plunges on us. Lower levels of growth factors. I'm talking about insulin. I'm talking about IGF-1 and many other growth factors. As we will see as this talk progresses, those fall, and that is a protective measure against cancer and accelerated aging. And then better cognition. Actually, a German study in 2008 showed that people over 60 who started CR, in only 8 weeks, they showed significantly better memories. So those are some of the benefits you might get if you decide to practice calorie restriction. So let's go now and try to see if we can define calorie restriction based on what I've talked about. And there was an original definition that a lot of people think about, and a lot of people still refer to when they're going to define calorie restriction, and that would be limiting calories to less than normal for height, sex, age, and activity level. So here is the National Institutes of Health. It's a chart that we excerpted, and you can see males for my activity level and age. I'm 62 years old. I'm very active. It would be normal here in red for me to take in from 2,400 to 28 calories per day. But I take in 1,850. And Meredith's intake is similarly reduced. I say that's the original definition. I would pose to you that the definition of calorie restriction has changed, and it has, through that change, has become easier to do. Let me explain what I'm talking about. I suggest that rather than the term calorie restriction, it might be more about activating longevity signaling patterns. And we have to thank for that many people, one of whom is a great scientist. Her name is Cynthia Kenyon. As it turns out, Meredith and I have the privilege of working with Dr. Kenyon right now on a study, Calorie Restriction, Optimal Nutrition, and Aging, CRONA. that was just launched. If you saw the announcement on ImmInst about wanting calorie volunteers for the study, you've seen that announcement perhaps around the world. And do pay attention to it. You should be a part of this study if you've been doing CR for 2 years or more. In any case, Cynthia back in 1993 found that if you downregulate a gene called DAF2, that DAF2 encodes a receptor in the worm that is very much like the insulin and IGF-1 receptor in humans. And by doing that, you can extend the life of worms up to 100%. Well, I guess I should wave my arms at this point and dance around. I think that's a great discovery. And that changed the world of CR forever. Let's look at another signal. This is one of my favorites. It's called AMP-activated protein kinase. It is an ancient regulator of metabolism. And unlike insulin and IGF-1, which are hormones which respond to food intake, this is kind of like the thermostat on your wall, which responds to, turns on the heat when when the room gets cold, when there are fewer calories, lower glucose, moderate protein, you have less adenosine triphosphate. And without getting too technical, that is simply the name of a molecule that cells love to burn for energy. But when they don't have that around, they need help. So AMP kinase comes to the rescue, and it does some very profound things with metabolism. For one thing, it helps form more mitochondria, so you have more engines in your cells to burn energy. Makes things more efficient, we might say. It turns down transcription. Well, what does that mean? It's simply transcription is just the activation of cellular processes. So AMP kinase does that, which makes sense when energy is not very available. The same thing, it shuts down the process of apoptosis, which is simply the killing of cells to clear out the debris to prevent against mutations. It also stops a molecule from forming called creatine phosphokinase, or creatine kinase, which is something that is easily tested in a local laboratory. And what it simply does is it powers energy in muscles. But AMP kinase figures, hey, when calories are short, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to block the formation of that particular molecule. It also, AMP kinase, blocks cholesterol synthesis. No wonder we have low cholesterol. It blocks fat synthesis. And in return, what happens is fats are oxidized for energy. And then AMP kinase sends up these proteins called glucose transporters. And what do? They help glucose get into the cells, so what's glucose is there can be burned for energy. And then last but certainly not least is this very sexy molecule, nitric oxide. And why would AMP kinase provoke more nitric oxide? Because that when the heart has less energy, it needs to make it easy for the heart to beat. And what happens? Nitric oxide relaxes the blood vessel walls and makes it easier for the heart to beat under low energy conditions. Very exciting. So there we have some markers that play a part of CR metabolism. Well, here we go. Here's another little diagram that talks about activating the longevity signaling patterns within calorie restriction. And I just wanted to briefly mention mTOR. mTOR has been the star of the show over this past year. And mTOR actually is reduced when calories, glucose, and amino acids are low. And what is mTOR? It is simply an enzyme which powers enzymatic actions, anabolic actions within the cell. And what happens when insulin, IGF-1, mTOR are reduced? You have less cell proliferation, less mutation, and less metastasis. All right. Now, let's see if we can get to this new definition of CR. And I would call it a low-calorie diet that downregulates growth and energy usage by activating longevity signaling patterns in cells. And so, now that we know that, and you're experts, and I've gone through a lot of slides to help you think differently about CR, let's ask this question. Very important. Does every low-calorie diet downregulate the insulin and IGF-1 pathway, which is what happens under calorie restriction? Well, what you see here is a dramatic answer to that question. Here we see a chart of testing two different carbohydrates. And one of these they are both 50 grams. One is 50 grams of white potatoes, everyone's favorite food, right? And another one is 50 grams of barley, which carbohydrate, I should say, from barley, which is actually happens to be one of my favorite foods. And what we see here, this was tested on healthy male volunteers. And we see that these healthy male volunteers had a very healthy glucose level of around 90 milligrams per deciliter. That's around 5 millimoles for those of you who think in millimoles. And in any case, when they first ate the white potatoes, here they were at this wonderful low fasting glucose. But then what happened? Within only 30 minutes, their glucose shot through the roof all the way up to almost 150 milligrams per deciliter, or 9 millimoles. And here we have a chart of insulin that was tracked with these two carbohydrates. So in any case, insulin followed right along with the influx of white potatoes and went rushing into the system in a great amount to try to keep up with this influx of glucose. But here we see for barley that insulin had a very muted response, just like the glucose influx that barley caused. So I would suggest to you that if you are following a low-calorie diet, but it's high glycemic, and you don't have to eat white potatoes, you can eat all kinds of things that cause glucose to really go through the roof, some very bad things happen. Well, here is, thanks to the International Diabetes Federation, a chart of what happens to healthy people when their postprandial, that means post-meal, glucose rises above 140 milligrams per deciliter. That equals risk. Remember those benefits that I showed you calorie restriction a few slides ago? Well, here it looks like those benefits are just erased. You have damage to the retina. You have the carotid artery is increased with plaque, higher oxidative stress, increased inflammation. The list goes on and on. So the point is, if you practice a high glycemic, low-calorie diet, you're not practicing CR. You're not getting CR benefits. All right, so you are going to limit glucose levels. So then what should you do? Should you turn to a high protein diet? Well, I would suggest that you need to think about that before you do that. Here is what can happen when you're practicing a low-calorie, high-protein diet. It can raise insulin-like growth factor 1 levels. That's IGF-1 levels. And IGF-1 is a major driver of growth in the body. So what happens when you have a high-protein CR diet? Well, here we see protein as 24% of the total calorie intake of calorie-restricted humans. As it turns out, Meredith and I were a part of this cohort. It was a part of a study that we did at Washington University that we were a part of. And look what happened when calories were 24% of their total calorie intake. Or should say protein is 24%. Look at this. IGF-1 levels went through the roof. That's on a reference range of 0 to 230. And I would say that's very surprising because successful experiments in animals have showed that calorie restriction in animals reduces IGF-1. So what we see is high protein diets can raise IGF-1 independent of calories. And here we see those long-lived Okinawans that we referred to earlier. Guess what? Their average protein intake was only 9%. So I would suggest that a calorie-restricted regimen with high protein might be dangerous. Let's look at that a little bit more. Here we see a slide. I don't know how well you can see it in the auditorium or if you want to zoom in on it. But anyway, here I've made insulin-like growth factor and the insulin-like growth factor receptor the star of the show. And we see that they are stimulated by high energy intake, high protein intake, by excessive alcohol, by growth hormone replacement. And we also see that IGF-1 suppresses tumor suppressor genes. It suppresses p53, which also protects against excessive cell proliferation. And we see the IGF-1s acting on a normal cell. And no surprise, IGF-1 makes that cell replicate. And then IGF-1 also acts on something that we call transformation, which actually can change the genetic makeup of a cell. And what do you know? If you do that enough and intensely enough, the likelihood of cancer is increased. Well, let's look just briefly at an individual tissue. And what we see is here is growth hormone. It's stimulating the growth hormone receptor. This is in a mammary gland. It stimulates IGF-1 within the mammary gland. And then suddenly, epidermal growth factor, integrin, these are various kinds of molecules that are stimulated within. Pardon?
I see that.
Was someone trying to get?
Yeah, I see that there is no one in the auditorium in Brussels now because Sven has disappeared. I believe they must have had some internet problem. Connection has dropped. But let's just wait until they are back.
Okay.
I guess they will be back. Yeah, I guess they will be back soon.
I would hope so. Gee.
I did not stop the video. I left the recording running because I expect they will be back any minute now.
Okay. Back any minute now.
Let's hope so. I can see Sven as soon as that's coming back. Anyway, it's
Okay.
really a very interesting talk so far.
Oh, well, good. Thank you very
I guess
much.
you're
It seems to
almost
be going.
you have almost converted me to calorie restriction, especially seeing
Oh,
all
now.
these guys who lived up to 113 years. That, I'd still love to find some way to combine benefit with test and taking pleasure in food.
Oh, believe me, we have great pleasure in food. We have many things that we talk just about that.
You do?
But today they didn't ask me to talk just about that, so they wanted more of a basics.
Yeah, you're still on record because I'm recording. Don't say anything that you don't want
Okay.
recording.
Okay.
So what do you normally eat?
What do I normally eat? Well, this morning, let's see, I had some lentils, which I enjoyed very much,
Lentils for breakfast?
and with garlic and with onions, and yes, and I wanted to increase tyrosine in my brain so I would be able to concentrate a little bit more, and I know that lentils and various kinds of proteins do that. And then I had something called Very Veggie, which is this wonderful vegetable drink that tastes quite good, and some walnuts and things like that. Yeah, actually, it's full of Mediterranean vegetables, tomatoes, and all kinds of things. Yeah. So that was just. I haven't had my normal breakfast yet because I wanted to leave the blood in my brain rather than in my stomach.
I see that Spain is almost back. And what do you plan having for lunch today?
Oh, what do I plan to have for lunch? Well, actually, we'll probably have barley and vegetables and really a lot of things, sweet potatoes and walnuts, olive oil, lots of olive oil.
I see Sven is coming back. He should be appearing now, any minute now.
Okay.
Welcome back, Sven. We have been waiting for you. Just give Paul a green light and he can continue. I guess you may have had some kind of connection problem, something. Or perhaps a power thing. These things can happen with computer system, but anyway, you're back now. And just give a green light to Paul when he can continue to talk. He has
Hello?
stopped. Hello, Sven.
Yes, hi.
Hi. So there was a small
Hi.
technical problem and we lost you. So please continue from. Do you know that we lost you?
Yes, we know.
No, I didn't know. I mean, I just continued talking. Where should I
Oh,
start?
okay. Go back in the slide.
Uh, where?
You stopped at the slide after this one, when we
Yes,
realized
I know.
that Sven was not here anymore.
Voila.
So maybe you can
That's
just
the
continue
slide.
from this one.
Excuse me? Now,
You are
where do you
talking
want me
about.
to? Is this where you would like me to start?
Yes, please.
All right. We were talking about high protein diets and the risk of increasing insulin-like growth factor, which by its very name, we all know drives growth in the body. So what I've done here with this slide is to make insulin-like growth factor, the hormone, and its receptor the star of the show. And as I was pointing out, When that happens, tumor suppressor gene products are indeed suppressed. P53, which protects against cancer, is suppressed. Okay, mitogenic molecules, actually such as estrogen, such as epidermal growth factor, stimulate IGF-1 along with high proteins. What happens? Apoptosis, which is protects against cell mutation, is actually downregulated. IGF-1 wants to preserve cells. What happens when the IGF-1 acts on normal cells? You get increased cell proliferation. Something can also happen, it doesn't always happen, but you can have transformation, which changes the genetic makeup of cells. What can that lead to? Well, studies show, hundreds of studies show, that increased IGF-1 may result in increased cancer risk, and if you already have cancer, it may result in accelerated metastasis. And we see that dramatically in the next cell, which is our next slide, which is a slide about the mammary gland. And what we see here is growth hormone stimulating the production of IGF-1 in the cell, and things that drive connective tissue such as epidermal growth factor and integrins are stimulated. This was great for when the mammary gland was developing, when let's say someone is young. But when you're older, what happens when those are stimulated through IGF-1? You get cell survival, you get cell proliferation, and wouldn't you know it, the risk of breast cancer is significantly increased. So, IGF-1 stimulation is not good. Well, what about stress? We're talking about things that can derail a low-calorie diet. We know great research from doctors Elizabeth Blackburn and Dr. Alyssa Epple. These are both scientists with whom we have the privilege of working. They looked at caregivers, and what they found was that caregivers who have stress, both perceived stress and chronic stress that they experience, they showed in an experiment that actually they were able to pick up markers of higher oxidative stress. They looked at their telomeres, and they saw that telomerase activity is actually reduced. And with that, wouldn't be surprised that the caregivers actually had shorter telomeres. So, when that study was reported around the world, Meredith and I and many others thought, gee, we need to make sure that we have strategies to reduce stress. And actually, strategies became a part of the CROA. Then calorie restrictors themselves have biological stress, and calorie restriction actually increases epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, which if a lion chases you around your apartment, you're likely to increase your adrenaline so you can run fast and get away from it and it won't eat you. But actually, epinephrine does a very good thing for calorie restrictors who have low glucose.
Can I ask you to stop one moment, Paul? I think Sven is having some connection problems again. So let's wait until the system says that is back, which should happen in a few seconds. I believe the Wi-Fi link in the Brussels conference hall today is not as good as it was yesterday. It's almost back.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah, yesterday it was really flawless. Let's wait for Sven to be fully back.
Hello?
Sven, we stopped when you began having connection problems. So I guess everything is back to normal now and Paul can start again?
Sorry, Julia, could you repeat that? We think Paul has dropped out, is that right?
Yeah,
No, I'm here.
told,
I stopped because I was told to.
Oh,
we were
okay.
seeing that you were having some connection problems in Brussels, so we stopped. And Paul is ready to restart on this slide
Right.
number 19.
I'm afraid I didn't catch that. So, question to the organizers: we are, even with the late start, approaching our time limit for this talk. Given our technical challenges, should we call it to a close for now?
Well, I'd like to continue if that's possible. I think I have some pretty important things here to talk about, and I'd like to be able to answer people's questions if they have any.
Well, we can hear you now, and everything is working, so...
Right. All right. So can I continue?
Right. You don't have very much time anymore, so maybe just go to the important stuff.
All right. Let me see.
I mean, you know, take a few conclusions and yeah.
Well, let me see. What that I can do. I'm going to not really talk about this slide, which is really, we talked about keeping insulin and IGF-1 low, and I wanted to give a recipe which actually does that. We have many, many delicious recipes that are planned to keep those two hormones low, and the name of this particular recipe is the Homage to Cynthia Kenyon. So I'll be glad to come back and talk with you more about that. So what this has led to, all of this introduction, is the CROA, which is a holistic approach to calorie restriction, a diet and lifestyle that activate pathways associated with increased longevity, but also a diet and lifestyle that increases happiness. I wish I had another 40 or 50 minutes to talk with you just about diet and food and how that can affect function. But that's an important, very important part of modern calorie restriction. We have strategies to reduce stress and camaraderie and support groups, which are a very, very important part of calorie restriction. Now, you tell me I don't have much time, so I just wanted to let you know that in addition to limiting calories for a better life now and for the possibility of living longer, there was a great breakthrough in 2003 by Mark Mattson. And that breakthrough was showing that time away from food can actually provide benefits that calorie restriction does not. So the first thing that Meredith and I did was to look at that study and to integrate the ideas into a new regimen that we call daily limited fasting. And what we found was calorie restriction, when combined with time away from food, enough to increase ketones, which we were able to measure, and down regulation of IGF-1 and other beneficial cell signaling, that allowed something that we had never experienced before, which was the possibility of reversing brain aging. And we are actually able to measure this in performance with various kinds of software. And we actually are able to form a strategy through daily limited fasting and other techniques that I talked with you about in the presentation that can make a significant difference in cognition. And to be quite frank with you, at 62 years old and standing here today and remembering this stuff pretty darn well, I don't think I could really be doing it without this technique of daily limited fasting, which can reverse brain aging. Now I want to warn you that if you practice CR, people will talk about you. And what they may say is what they said about those CROA All-Stars. You keep having birthdays, but you still look so young. And with that, I don't know if you want to give me time to answer questions, but it's been quite a pleasure spending time with you today. And I would love to answer questions if that's what you want, or perhaps come back for another session sometime and answer people's questions. I'll leave it up to Sven. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. So I suggest that we take one question from Paul.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
My name is Andreas Kern, and I wanted to ask you, what does calorie restrictionists think about the intake of dairy products and milk?
Well, that could be a part of calorie restriction diets. However, I must point out that dairy products and milk actually act as an insulin secretagogue. What that means is that independent of calorie restriction, they can stimulate insulin. So also, many of them stimulate IGF-1. So remember back in the middle of the talk when you saw that one of the most important things is to downregulate the insulin and IGF-1 pathway. That's one reason why we advise people, if they want to eat dairy, to look and test very carefully of their insulin and IGF-1 levels. And we, Meredith and I, avoid them for that reason.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Paul, we will now leave you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Paul, this is Caliban. Thank you very much for being with us today. Obviously,
Thank
there
you,
were a
Caliban.
few technical glitches for which we apologize. Since
That's
you
all right.
are now quite an expert at doing this over the internet, the Institute has a bi-weekly live stream cast where we have interviews with notable people, and people can call in and ask them questions. And if you're at all able to stomach another one of these, we would love to have you back, and people will be able to ask you further questions then, and maybe you can expand on some of the recipes and other scientific aspects of the talk that sadly we didn't quite have time for today.
That's okay. I would love to do that. I really consider myself a part of ImmInst. I come to this site quite regularly, and I'd like to contribute in any way that I can.
Well, thank you so much for contributing today. I'll hand over to
Sure.
Sven.
Bye, Paul.
Bye-bye. Thank you a lot.